Good evening and welcome. I'm Claire Howarth, Vice Principal of Pre-16, and we're absolutely delighted to welcome so many of you this evening to this webinar on connecting with your teen. And I'd like to welcome Dr Scarlett Mattoli, a highly respected clinical psychologist who's going to share with us this evening some advice and guidance on how we can realign family boundaries during the teenage years. We've got a lot to get through this evening, and we would like to spend some time at the end answering your questions. And while we're on that subject of questions, thank you so much to all the parents that took some time to share their questions with us, and we hope we can address those during this webinar, and if not, we'll try to address some more of those at the end. So Dr. Scarlett, over to you, and I'll see you at the end of this webinar. Thanks.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Glad you can join us tonight. So happy to see so many people here, even though I can't see you yet. I'm going to start my screen sharing now. Hope you can all see that. And I've just entitled this one, The Parent Manual for Teen Brains. We've got some expected stuff, some unexpected stuff, and expected, unexpected. So as we go through it, I'm going to start you off with a few reminders of basic neurodevelopment, what's happening in our children's brain, what's happened in ours. We're going to look at the multitasking of teen development. It's a very busy time, and we do need to remind ourselves how much is going on in their lives. We'll look at a few places where parents are welcome, where they're not welcome. We're also going to look at, in terms of that development, how motivation can be present or how it can be hijacked. And once we see a little bit of that, we'll think about how we can write that balance in the home. Now, we won't have all of the solutions here given today, but lots to think about and lots to reflect on, depending on each person's individual household. So let's get started, just looking at some basics of neurodevelopment and a little bit more. Just to start us off and give us the grounding, we've got brains full of neurons. Now, these are 600 billion when we're born, and all they want to do is connect. We've got different types depending on where they're connecting in our body. But for the most part, what they want to do is keep us in balance. So what we have is that mood and cognitive function balance. That's the perfect place for school. And what we have when we're in the developing brain is a neural tube, which grows up, creates the brain. And by the time we're born, many pieces are in shape, but not all are present or functioning fully. So we know what we can see from the little babies are the giggles, the smiles, lots of behavior, lots of needing to be close to us. And this starts off fairly early on with mirror neurons, and they help us respond to other humans, see what's happening with them, engage ourselves. Once we have this sense of safety, being able to connect with others, cognitive development starts taking off. So what we have is a lot of connections going on, and we can see over here, we have a lot of neurons, not a lot of connections. As we get to 6 months, there's a lot of inputs. We've had some different smells come into our system, different sounds, different sensations. And by 2 years, we have a really congested network. But at 2 years old, we have a lovely area internal called the hippocampus. This is a relay station for long-term memory. And what that does is helps us access memories that we can store. So people call terrible twos a time of repetition, demands, but this is actually the first step into volition, into that self-direction, into choice and remembering what's rewarding. So by 4 years, we're hoping that children are ready to sit down for about 20 minutes and pay attention. There's sort of a calming that happens in the body along with this as well. But we are what we repeatedly do. And Aristotle said this, and there's nothing more true. All of these neurons need to connect. They need to create different parts of our brain, which is usually referred to in different lobes, but they have different functions. And I won't give you a complete tour of this tonight. I just want to help you understand some of the areas. Again, language, reading, very important for school. But vision is one of our first areas developed. The taste as well, and then the touch and sensation. Later on, we have motor control. So our whole body, starting from a very young age, is about slow and purposeful development of different areas at about the time we need them. So when we think of the teenage years, which we'll get to in a little bit. Our brains are doing something they really need to do. They were predestined to do, and there's a lot of work going on. It's invisible to us, though. So what we have inside the brain here, going back into the cerebellum, into all these other bits, we have a lot of connections. They're working simultaneously at lightning speed, and we want them to become efficient. So when I show you this picture, you might all think apple. The thought comes up instantaneously, but this is what's really happening. We have a lot of connections going on built up from our learning. We might have tasted some apple at one point when we were a baby, had some apple juice. At some point we start crunching it, and all of our sensory information starts to build up. We know what it sounds like when we bite into an apple. We can close our eyes and feel an apple in our hand, and we know about what apple shape is. We also know what it smells like. Different types of apple taste good to us. We start developing our own sense of self and reflection on it. But not all cells are just like the ones I showed you before. We get a lot of different shapes, and they all do different things and at different times. So we have, for example, lovely Purkinje cells that are at the cerebellum, and they are shaped like this beautiful tree. These are to help us with the memory relay station and balance. We've got other ones in the cerebral cortex, which go deep, all different shapes, helping to connect to each other over time, not all linked up on day one. So there's a lot of work here. And when we look at teen development, we've also got other parts of our body developing. We've got enormous surges in growth, we've got pubertal development and cognitive and emotional. So we start off nice and tiny, feeling safe, reaching out to our parents, getting that sensory feedback. We feel secure. We can liken that to plants. Now, I've chosen to refer a few times to plants today because I know that we all like a bit of green in our lives and we're not getting enough, even though we're on Zoom. So when we start off with a little bitty sapling, we protect it. As parents, we try and keep it very safe, nurture it, give it the right environment to grow in. And eventually, well, if we're likening this to children, we put them in kindergarten. We put them together with others, but we still keep lots of safe boundaries around them. And as they grow and develop, we hope to bring them out and show them other adults, other children, other experiences, and we help them broaden their thinking and safely approach new behaviors. And then eventually we put them into high school. We try and put lots of struts around them. We make sure that the school is the right place, the education system is the one we want. We're trying to look at how kinds of friends that they join up with, what kind of devices they use. We put a lot of struts in place. Not all of them are needed or welcome, though, even if we think they are. So we look at teenage development as going from kind of silly younger age into an invisible hormone bank. It's not just hormones, though. We can see these young boys who are just happy to be together, growing up and going into competition for each other. And eventually, all those little silly kisses grow up into competition for real kisses. So we can look at these trees that are trying to grow. So are the individuals, their quirkiness. They'll still find their way upright, regardless of what we do. We can put all the struts in place we want. But what teenage brains are designed to do is develop the way they were preset to do, given the environment they're in, and also find like-minded brains. That's one of the best things they do. When we think about children in kindergarten, all the children sitting there coloring together in one corner, we'll go find the other ones who color. The ones who play with blocks will go off and play with blocks. And the other ones who are tearing up colored paper strips will just enjoy being with each other. But they recognize each other before they know what it is. And hopefully one day everybody finds someone they can love, that they can feel close to, be friends with, out there in the big world. But going back to that teenager ahead, what's happening? Now, some of you have got teenagers who might be just approaching early years, and I understand we've got some older teens parents on the line tonight, so I want to try and acknowledge everyone, although we will be staying with the earlier set. Now, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of multitasking going on, and we really have to think of this in terms of a lot of developmental theory. Now, I've put them up here so we can see how they're moving through, but during this 12 to 18 years, we've got a lot of thinking that changes. And these Erickson says that we've also got identity coming on, intimacy and love. Kohlberg, in that moral development, says that we're really worrying about how do we get to the way we see ourselves? How do we choose the values that we're going to have in life? And we also know that when we're sort of preschool to about 6 years of age, we take that macaroni necklace to mom and dad or our caregivers, we show it to them, and they say, that's wonderful. And what it does eventually is it confirms self. I'm good. I'm okay. And as long as that's gone pretty well, what they do between 7 and 12 years of age in school is their circle trust kind of widens, and they start to say, okay, I'm going to let teachers teach me, and then I'm going to put some output out there, and I'm going to let them judge me. We start increasing that trust for others. We need parents a little less already, but we still rely on them because we're immature. But when we go to 13 and above, it all moves outside of that circle. It goes on to third parties, looking at models, politicians, anyone out there in the world who could give them another model. They're pretty sure on who they are. They know the family values, and teenage years are a time for challenging, exuberant neuronal growth. So what we saw earlier on rather, are these connections trying to make sense. Early adolescence has a lot of new connections, and we'll go through those in just a minute. We have a lot of growth with puberty. We have bone growth. We have hormonal changes that are massive. And we also have a lot of cognitive and social learning going on, more than we've ever been challenged with before. And as I said, because we're inviting in third parties, it's not within our known repertoire. We necessarily invite risk. And this is the testing bit that most parents see. The invisible bit is all this going on inside. The good thing is, somewhere between 15 and 18, we get neuronal pruning. Okay, so we have exuberance here, synaptic exuberance. They're trying to connect everywhere, get all this stuff in. And as I mentioned before, we grow from the brain from the back forward, and this prefrontal cortex is sort of the last piece to get linked up. But first, we have to make sure the meaningful connections are in place. So when we look at it further on, we also have a lot of more density in these connections. These are more robust by the time we're 24. But at 15, even though there's more and we're starting to prune some, they're still a little bit weak. Now, there's wonderful information. UNICEF have done this on the second window of opportunity. There's a lot being written about this because it's also vulnerability. They have to try on a lot of new faces, a lot of trust, a lot of different things in order to develop and decide who they are going to be in the world. They've moved past parenting, and they kind of know who their parents are and what their values are. They really are thinking about themselves in the future. They don't necessarily acknowledge it that way, but sometimes they try and behave like adults. This is the behavior we see that sometimes is irritating. Yeah. But what we want to look at here is in a timeline, and this is looking at the brain from the top. This is the front part of the brain, that prefrontal cortex I spoke of. What we have in the neurons is when certain types of neurons are very, very useful, and we use those pathways multiple times, our brain puts a coat of myelin, which is sort of a fatty coating around it, much like an electronic cord. And we want to make sure that when we put that plastic around that electronic cord, one, we contain it, and two, when we use that pathway again and again, it's not going to be frayed. And we can see the color here, this darker area, the purple bits mean that we've got that fat covering. The red bits mean there's lots of firing off going on. And as we see, it's not until 20 years that we get a lot more, but it's still not as full up here. We're now fully aware that this doesn't get fully sealed up until about 25 to 30, on average 27. We're grateful for that, but it's a lot longer than most parents wish it would be. I'm aware of that myself. But we can see here, this first area, this lovely butterfly coming out on top, motor cortex. Lovely bit back here, visual cortex. So we know it's fairly consistent with the bits that we need to develop first. But emotion control resides up here. We know this is not what our teenagers are really, really good at yet. So there's a lot of things in here. As I mentioned, risk taking is one of the biggest parts of it though. And we have to give them credit, because with puberty alone, there is so much happening. We're surging with hormones that started off in utero. These are set at base level at birth. We can't really choose much about them. They get decided for us. And then when we get these different baths later on of either male or female hormones, it starts a cascade. Not the same in everyone, but these are pretty stable. And what we know is that when puberty hits, it starts changing. So we can see a lot of growth happening just between these years alone. And this is where we get growing pains when they're asleep. But there's a lot of invisible things happening, as I said, we can't see. But we know that somewhere in this 12 to 18 years, there's so much happening. And it's a private time too. So if I go quickly, just reminding everybody here, this crossover gives us the intensity of what's going on just for puberty development alone, not all at the same time. And this bar represents kind of a range of when it can happen, not how long it takes. But we do have to consider that the density here happening with a lot of other parts for females and for males makes it really tricky for them. They don't have that emotional control, as I mentioned. They've got hormones that are out of rage, but they've got a lot of other things going on as well. We can't blame it just on hormones. So when we look at what we'd like to see our teenager doing, we've got that fully acceptance that they live in a digital world. We expect that we give them a computer and they'll be happy and self-regulating. Nothing could be further from the truth. We'd like to think that we've put all those good struts around them and they're going to grow up looking nice and neat and tidy. And you know what? We're disappointed when they look like that, because that's the reality. It's going everywhere. Those neurons are absolutely connecting at wildfire pace, not controllable, and they're greedy. They have to connect to everything. It's kind of the last spurt before we don't get to keep them all anymore. So what we end up seeing is this. All of this rage or hormones or confusion or embarrassment, it all comes out at once. And they're not necessarily in control of it, even though it feels like they're directing at us sometimes. But let's take a quick look under the hood. What is happening? So this is what we feel like sometimes, but what they're getting is this. Now, in the old days, when I was young, 100 years ago, people would just be straight up and talk about you behind your back. We knew what we could rely on. We knew what was happening. Today, they'll text it to you. It's invisible to everyone else except for the recipient. And this kind of festers. Yesterday, we used to just be bullied straight up by the big person and we knew who to avoid. Today, it comes sleeping into cyber warfare. We get all the words and they build up. We're not aware of them, but underneath the hood, as I said, there's a lot that's starting to develop. And as our personality is developing and our sense of self is developing, this builds into it. And because we're looking at third parties, which includes peers, we take it on board as though it were very, very real. And there's nothing that adults, already grown up brains, can really do to change this course. Our brain is designed to take it on board, as helpless as it makes us feel. So when are we doing that? Probably at night, feeling bad, not getting sleep, waking up the next day, getting it again, unable to think about things, and then going home, playing computer games. And this is what our teens do. They get lost. They go back to a world where they feel in control, where at least they can see what's happening from from beginning to end, and they have a bit more choice. Even if they lose, it's their loss because they can figure out what they did wrong, what they need to come back to, what they need to try again. But then staying up all night, of course, gets them in trouble at school because they haven't been doing their homework. So if we look at that cascade of onslaught of events that are happening all day long, there's a lot of invisible stuff, a lot of thinking, a lot of controlling how we feel. And all the times that we do, we're not showing where we're feeling like this. And with the advent of everything being public, we can't control who or who doesn't give us the right to feel ashamed or hurt in privacy. Everything becomes so public, it's hard to find a place to hide. We used to just be able to go into our bedroom, feel a bit of failure, lick our wounds, fill with some grace and dignity, and then come out when we've wiped away our tears and are ready to try on another personality angle. But then we go back out, starts all over again the next day. It's hard to live down. Then we go home. It's a reminder every day on the text. We're living with it, self-reflecting with this. So for teenage years now, it's not just as complicated as it once was. We don't just have the basics of neuronal growth. We have a lot of added confusion. And that doesn't imply that we need to take away digital worlds from the kids. We do need to help them understand how to regulate it. Now, do they want that influence from parents? Probably not. But most younger teens look at older teens. So this is where we go to that third party and try and match them up with people that we can trust. Now, we also have relationships. Because we're coming into puberty, we've got all of the hormones raging, the difficulties with managing intimacy, interaction, and interpersonal relationships. And we also have it with friends. We don't know how to think about it, confused, and there's so much going on, as I said, under the hood. The last thing we need is a parent asking us, what are you thinking? How are you feeling? We don't know when we're a teen. It's not there. And all we need is our best friend shouting at us. And we're like, what? How did that just happen? We're learning to manage relationships we've never really had to manage before. They're far more complex. We don't have all the skills yet to manage them. This is the synaptic exuberance. So it's not just natural growth for our bodies. We're creating all kinds of neurons and networks for understanding relationships, and later on we'll prune away the ones we don't need. But our brain says, while we're learning them, we need to keep all of them. There's something important about it. And so we keep seeing the same mistakes over and over again in some students until they can figure out that they don't like the way it feels or they want to do something different. But that comes over time. What we can see is regardless of how fertile the environment is that we give them to grow, with this onslaught, not everyone flourishes. Not everyone feels like they can recover. And sometimes we need to give some intervention. So they'll tell us, please stop. Sometimes they might turn away. Sometimes they might say it to the other kids. This is the time we can intervene. So first, let's look at where you're not welcome, though. They don't want you telling them how to use their digital information. They know that they're not supposed to, but their brain is telling them to do it. We've got a reward pathway in there that's firing off, looking for newness, taking risks, trying new things. It's primed to do it. It's before us, so to speak. And we also know that we don't need advice on our dressing up because we're trying on new stuff. One day we'll be goth, the next day we're going to be jock. We're going to go out, go to our peers, judge how they view us, reflect on that feedback, and keep what we like. Go out the next day and try again. But having the judgment from the outside from parents is not only not welcome, it's not relevant to them. You're not a peer. And telling us what to eat, what not to eat, we're worried about growing bodies we know that they need to develop. But this is another one where they say you're not welcome. Even though, as parents, we know we're supposed to be trying to provide the best nutrition for growing bodies, especially in this exuberant phase for the bodies. And then just asking about homework, relationships. Why aren't we connecting? Where's my little girl? We all feel these urges, these draws to get back into their life. But the truth is, they're moving on. They are going to the next stage of development. It's the right thing to do. It's the necessary thing to do. And they're primed to do it. Their bodies are out of their control and ours. And that's difficult, right? Now, we know that one of the things that we're not going to do anymore is go out there and harm children, but our words behave just the same way. So sometimes when we try and pull them back in, we use words that are a bit stronger than we mean, and they have exactly the same effect. So all of this prying, pushing, pulling makes the children feel overconstricted, overstructured, and the only thing they want to do is escape. It makes them less conforming, not more. And then we put on more. So we plead with them, we say, listen, they give us the cold shoulder. We try and understand them. They don't have the words. They're still learning them. They don't know how to express it. Or we just want to comfort them. They're just our little baby. So recently, it seems like, and we just want to help them. But to them, it just feels like we're trying to pull them back in. It doesn't feel like we're allowing them to get to that synaptic exuberance. So where is this balance between letting them grow and letting them have that growth that their body is predestined to do, and helping them to stay bound within the values that we really want to have? When all they really want to do is go off and think about how their friend upset them, how the girlfriend might have, said something horrible, how the friends have been kind of mean, and how they think about trying on that goth look that day. But what this is what's going on inside. They've got to put on the pause button. They really have to say, I can't think anymore. And they need a lot of time off to just put it in place. So sometimes this is what it turns out like, though, that depression, the turning away completely from everyone because it's overwhelming. Not every child does this, but it's difficult and it's harder to get to these. We'll talk about what we might do with these to help them later. But remember, they're just trying to grow whatever quirky way they need to. Their brain is doing it. They don't have a choice. Even when we put the best struts around them, they're going to go and do something different. And they're highly motivated to do it. So let's look quickly at their motivation and how it might get hijacked from time to time. Now, returning again to all of these lovely neurochemicals that are flooding them and us, what we really want is that balance. It's very rare, not something that we just get. And what we get is the mix. We get anxiety when we've got that dopamine very low, dopamine too high. We get schizophrenia, not something that we're seeing often in our children, thank goodness. When we get too low depression and we're mixed with very low serotonin, we get that depression state. But they've also got love, really fueled by hormones, but lots of love going on in their teens too. And then lots of fight or flight, stress, math test. Parents are going to come down on me. I didn't make a good grade. I didn't study. I stayed online too long. Again, no emotion control, no inhibition. So these are going up and down constantly. Yet another thing going on under the hood there. But what we know with this dopamine system, it's one of the best ones to tap into. We know that they've got their pride there. We know that they've got their nurture and love has come from there. And it's the way that we feel good about doing things. We've got liking and pleasure. But we also know that there are some things that can hijack this system. So when we leave it by itself, normally we expect that this reward system going through the prefrontal cortex, once we set it off, makes us feel joyful about learning. We feel so good, we do it again. Just like those 2-year-olds reading again, wanting to do something themselves again, rather, with that hippocampus coming online. And it's a natural reinforcing system. But what we have, and here, the D2 section, these are the ones that get hijacked in the mesolimbic dopamine pathway when we can't get off the devices, when we start taking drugs, or when we just get obsessive about something. Yeah, and then this is where it could turn, where we want to do something that dopamine is firing off, where we like something originally, it turns into a wanting. So we don't want them to take opioids. This is just a reference. But what we can do is hijack this system for doing well, for grades, for wanting to connect with other people, by putting them in touch with their coaches and other people they like to be with. So if we want to get more into this system, we have to start off with hope, though. And this is underlies everything. And lovely theorist Professor Snyder said, what we need to have is 3 pieces in place. We need to really understand that we have goals, we have a self, we have a future. Something seems hopeful. We need to have a sense of agency, that we are ourselves. Now, remember, this is still developing in teens. So it can shift every day. They can be motivated to do one thing one day and not the next. So we have to be cautious and what we encourage them to do and what we hold back on. But they need to have the pathway. And this is the bit they are developing. They need to be able to think of that plan, put it out there, and meet those goals. This is the prefrontal cortex work, though. Planning, organization, motivation to do things, inhibition, not being distracted to go to other tasks, and emotion control. It's still developing. So we expect that this one, as long as they have some hope for something, they'll give it a go. And we know this because we can see with self-determination that most students will get in there and try something. Self-determined, that intrinsic motivation, they've got autonomy, mastery, and purpose when they're playing video games. Yeah, not so much when they are having interpersonal relationships or failing at their homework or not pleasing parents anymore. It doesn't feel that way. That extrinsic bit is what they feel more at this point. So hooking onto this one, which is very much in that dopamine system, is the best way to get them. We've got to get them interested in what they feel they can do, giving them hope that it's possible, and so that they can feel that mastery. But this one, when we're little, it came naturally. We just are intrinsically motivated to test out stuff, to go and touch a button, to go and taste stuff, to try anything new. But as we get older, this becomes a little bit more complicated, as you would imagine. And this is where we spend most of our day, in between them, in between intrinsic motivation, because we're at school. We're not at home just doing what we want to do. But what we know is that external regulation comes in, whether it's from parents or teachers or a tutor or anyone else, it makes the shutdown happen. It makes that stress hormone come out, and actually prefrontal cortex switches off at that point. So what little bit they had functioning is not there at all. And they're going into more of a fight or flight state, or just pure amotivation. They just switch off completely. It's not depression necessarily, but it can lead to it in some students. But what we have here, this dopamine pathway, if they feel not motivated, don't have any hope, don't have anything else going on, as I said, this is where we want to watch off. We call it anhedonia, where they're not feeling any emotions whatsoever, right? But the other place we can get in here is what children do from very early on, sense of self-efficacy. And this is where they feel that they can do something by themselves and they will get up and try it without even being invited, even if they think they'll fail or they don't know what the result is going to be. So we can see children, as I said, will just go touch a button just to see what it does. They don't assume that they're going to fail. They learn that that's a possibility later on, or they're told it. But what we want to see is them trying it on from various different sources. So we see performance outcomes. They have to give it a go and reflect on their own behavior. We have to see how our peers behave. So with teens, this is especially important because they're following these third-party models, whether it's a teacher, a peer, or a model, or a movie star. We have to go with that physiological feedback too. Did this feel good? Did my body just flood me with fear chemicals? And then there's some verbal persuasion. That's about the only key left for parents, and it's a very minimal, thin sliver of a key, even though it's there for some. But what we want to be careful of as well as the self-efficacy, self-reflection area, we can actually move into our expectations being fulfilled by what people tell us. So, for example, in this little one, the teacher's always saying you do great at math, and the child doesn't anchor it in their ability to do well. Then we have a difficulty because then they get this feedback loop that says they can't achieve. So those expectations aren't done. And then that's where we get to students who end up not doing well. They haven't really anchored themselves in self. So we really want to go back to where parents could intervene here. Where can you put in some effort? Where can you help them think about it? There's actually a lot more places than we realize, right? So we want to think about a lot of the modern theorists who've given us some great thinking space. And here's a simple one, not a simple one, actually quite a complex one, where we want to look at the growth mindset now. Carol Dweck said, there's a fixed mindset, one that says that things can't be changed, there's no room for growth. If you're not good at that, you're not going to be good at it forever. And what she said, if we could just try a little bit more of a growth mindset, it's a little bit more of that self-efficacy coming to the foray. Now, this is naturally where teens should be. A lot of them shut down to fixed. It's not the only two mindset places we can be, but it's very popular right now. So we try and think about how could you use this? So characteristics of that fixed one, believing intelligence is fixed. If we've done a poor grade once, that's it, we're off for life. Whereas that growth mindset might say, hey, you didn't get it this time, let's try again. So one of the best advice that we can give for parents is avoid praising the intelligence, avoid praising just the effort, good try. We want to be concrete with it, giving them words that they can anchor it on. I can see that you couldn't do that math yesterday, and it looks like you worked hard and you're doing it today. Giving them really solid feedback on what they've done. Again, effort is fruitless if you don't put anything out there. And as I said in the previous example, if your math teacher says you're always good at this and you start assuming, oh, I guess I'll do well, and then the real feedback is you don't, you start that feedback loop that's quite negative. But here, if we can take that pathway to mastery, effort is the way to go. It's a slightly different way to think about it for students whose brains are synaptically available to grow, but we have to use diverse engagement strategies for these students. We need to think about their individual effort. If they have any learning differences or neurological differences, some students can't pay attention for a long time. Other students are just not readers. Others not so good at that writing. It's okay. We need to go with their strengths. So knowing a child's strengths is one of the biggest areas, knowing what they're already good at, but knowing that it's not fixed, knowing that we can grow. Now, I'll also share these slides afterwards, so I won't perseverate on this one too long, but there's a lot of opportunities there. And this is one of the biggest ones. When teens say, I can't do it, I don't want to talk yet. Give them that opportunity to think about the future piece. There's still hope. They're not finished yet. So here's a couple of other examples of what we could say as parents to encourage students. When we're hearing that fixed mindset, we could go with not everybody's good at it, just try. But when we have the growth mindset, we can think about learning. When we look here, and these are a little bit younger age group, but they still work, we want people to say, I can try, I can do it again. Or go with a tutor, go to a third party that they trust, put them out there and get them to keep recognizing and clocking their own behavior, saying, I am getting better at it. But we have to really, really keep in mind as parents and helping students understand mistakes happen. Now, the biggest part of being an adult as I said, but that synaptic pruning, your brain cuts a lot of the mistakes. It kept them while you were a teenager, and then when you start emerging into adulthood, it gets rid of them. You don't need it anymore. It's not very efficient. So what we need to remind students is that we made mistakes. They may not want to hear it, but that this is what learning is. We have to get out there and experience different mistakes and reflect on them so that we can think about the hope for trying again. This is how we get that self-efficacy firing off, and we fire off the natural dopamine reward system and getting them invested in themselves. So we have to push past this comfort zone, feeling safe, maybe in the computer stuff, maybe not talking to other students, maybe just sitting down and doing what they're told, or fighting back. Believe it or not, when they're fighting back, it's a comfort zone for them because the fear is there. But once they can push past, they go into that growth zone. We've reignited their brain. Yeah. And Chikmin Suhaili found out about this, that once we do something we're really good at, we are more aroused. We've got more dopamine, more awareness, and we sense that control. And we aren't aware of tiredness or thirst or hunger, and we just keep going. And this is what we can see a lot of teens doing today. They get into a flow state when they're playing video games. There are students who are doing other things than just playing video games, though. But it's a place where we want to notice where they are good at it. And even if it's video games, you can hook in there and give them a growth mindset. You were really great at GTA 5 today. I liked the way you guys robbed that bank. Now, of course, I'm being silly, but we do have to understand their world if we're going to understand where they get flow and where they're feeling rewarded. This is your easy way in. As I said, it happened naturally once upon a time, and for them, it's still happening naturally. They're just not as aware. But what we do as adults is we have grit and persistence. Angela Duckworth wrote about this, but we know this is not a dopamine state. This is kind of behind it. And this is where people just put their foot down and get on with it. This is not necessarily a state we see in teens, but we can see it often. I remember they're still building their groundedness. They're still understanding it. Their resilience, that's in there with that self-efficacy, still being developed. Now, their integrity is also being formed because it's their own belief system and values about themselves. It doesn't mean they dumped yours. It just means they're still figuring out which ones they want. But a lot of them do have that tenacity. And that's usually showing up when they're fighting against us as parents. They're highly motivated. They're interested in getting their way, and they're putting in a lot of effort. So they do show grit, just in a different way. But what we can help them do is think about how they can apply it to all of their other problems. Okay, because this is what they think it looks like. As I said, looking at parents, looking at adults, they've got it going on. We don't remember how we got there, but we look like we've got a lot of things that are working. What they can't see is this piece. It actually took a lot of work to get there. It didn't happen overnight, and they're going through that process now, and it takes time. So if we show them the patience, they'll have the patience for themselves. And that's tricky, I know, but it's one of the keys. So this is just a quick one to show you what's happening. And it sort of gives you an idea with the newborns, not a lot of connections, toddler growing up, teenagers, many more connections. But by adulthood, we hope to have it all smoothed out, the two halves of the brain talking to each other. But they're not there yet. That's the problem. So when we think about what's going on in the home, I've got some really bog standard things that we always want to keep in mind. We model what we want to see them doing. So if we make sure there's good foods in the house, that we keep to a regular sleep, and we keep well hydrated, and we keep our temper in control with all of these parts of our body satisfied, we stand a better chance of remaining to be a good model and keeping ourselves in balance. They need regular organized group exercise. And you know something? Coaches are the best models. And I've shared this before, but most teens, if you tell them eat your broccoli, they'll go, nope. And as soon as coach says, you could eat some more broccoli, they'll look at them and go, how much? It's just magic. They're highly motivated to do it. So getting them into groups where you're happy to be happy for them to be in contact with, led by, and influenced by is a great way to continue with your values and let them do it in the way that they're primed to do. Now, organizational skills are still developing at this time. They don't want your influence. The school has a lot of great things, but we know that the ADHD children, there's other children with just poor executive function skills, need help with this. Sometimes enlisting a third party for help can be an idea so that they can start feeling in control again, have hope for their future, and doing well at school. Some children just do not have the ability to keep still, or they have sensory integration difficulties. And if they need help, get it for them. Recognize it. Don't go to that critical voice. Try and find out what they need and try and get it in their words. Or if they can't, try on different things. Be brave. Social skills training. There are some teens when they didn't connect as children in that playground, or they've outgrown the kids who are still tearing up paper in the corner. They need some help. They haven't learned how to integrate, and we can see it coming out in the behaviors. Perhaps it's a little bit more violent, perhaps it's shutting down, but it's important to get it there. Again, it's in school. They've got loads of modeling from other teens, but we can still give them help. And another one, breathing, relaxation, and mindfulness. We are all stressed. So are they. We all need to learn how to do it. So sometimes making family options out of these, even before a meal, just stopping together and say, let's just take a breath together. Let's sit down together. If you can keep them still for 5 minutes, you've actually had their body relaxing, unless they're angry with you about something, in which case they're filling up with chemicals. Be careful. But if you check in with them, you can find out. Now, counseling sometimes is just necessary. If they really do tell you something feels bad, give them the privacy of that space. If all the other um, models and options aren't working and nothing else is going and they're really starting to cut themselves off, go ahead and get them a safe place to let go. They need it. And this again fulfills that third party entity where they'll feel a little bit more comfortable being treated like an adult. And resiliency support. This is something when children finally say, I can't do it anymore, we need to take them out of their own place and help them get support, whether it's through the school, through specialist instruction. And sometimes even changing schools is an option. We never know. We have to be ready for them. And then the last one we look at is sometimes it involves the whole family. I work with lots of individuals and lots of families. And the best result comes when we've got everyone on board looking for the change and we have each person give their own voice to it. So that teenager is allowed to say, I'm not sure what feels like, but less of this would be helpful. And when everyone has a voice and they know they'll be heard in a non-threatening environment, it can really help to keep balance back. And we can hear things they wouldn't otherwise tell us. We also know that we wouldn't go and just fix a child. It doesn't work that way and then put them back into a system that doesn't feel comfortable for them. It has to be a two-way street. So looking at it all together, in order to really know your teen, you have to know where they are and their development, that there's a lot going on. We can't see it, and it's got to happen. We think we can see their bodies or their hormones or their acne or other things going on, or their grades. These are just the outputs. There's so much going on underneath. We really have to make sure that we give them hope, that we keep them knowing that this too will pass. You know, between 14 to 18, something's got to happen, but you'll get them back. I know an improved version even. Yeah, we need to make sure that they feel that they can do things, that they've got hope for it, that it's something they want to do, and that they do the things they have to. They have to go to school. But if we can tap into that and help them feel a little bit more like there's growth and hope there, and they are allowed to feel those flow experiences and recognize for themselves how to feel good. What we can see is that grit can come out sometimes, that they'll try harder for other things. And we do see that. So thank you very much for letting me borrow your brains a bit. And I know that's a lot going on at once. As I said, I will share the slide deck. And I'd love to hear all the questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite Claire back in. I'm going to stop sharing. And we're going to go on with questions. So Claire, hello.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Scarlett, and thanks for staying with us. So many parents that have joined us this evening. I guess, Scarlett, whilst I just share a couple of things that I've taken away as a parent myself of an 18-year-old, and I've been talking to you about the next stage for me, which is that sense of letting go even more. We can invite parents to put some questions in at the bottom while we're just having a quick chat. But one thing that struck me was that deeper understanding I've taken away of trying to manage teenage behaviour, but with a deeper understanding of what we don't see, which is the development of the teenage brain, and some reasons why our children act the way that they do sometimes. So that really struck me, and I have been thinking about some of the times that I've interacted with my son, or indeed young people at school, and have come away with a different lens. So thank you for that. And I think we've probably all heard growth mindset used a lot as a term, and I think unfortunately used without a real understanding of what it means. And I think that word grit can be used, and people can use it a little bit cynically. And I know teenagers, if you say grit, they might, roll their eyes up and not understand what that means. But when you talk about just the subtleties and nuances of how we word things as a parent, it's so crucial, even just using that word yet, and avoid praising intelligent and just sheer effort, giving some substance to it, understanding what you're acknowledging, because praise can put a huge amount of pressure on a young person that's still trying to navigate and find their way within the world with all of that development going on. One question that's come in here is about intentionality, which has many meanings. But thank you, Kia, for your question. How may we as parents help a child grow towards more intentionality? Do you have a response to that one? Quite a big one.
Absolutely. No, it's big. And I think intentionality is something that you do when you know that I'm doing this with a purpose. Again, I have not just hope that something will come if I take this action, but I have some certainty too. And there has to be a known entity on the other side for us to do something intentionally. Now, I don't know the age of the student that we're speaking about, but depending on age, they can do a bit more when they're 18 than when they can when they're 14. At 14, remember, they're more interested, and their eyes literally are scanning the environment for new models and how people are perceiving them. And that's all they're doing. But once we get to 17, 18, we've got that synaptic pruning starting to happen fairly well, and we've got a little bit more emotion control. We're better able to make directed choices. And then that's where we can see the intentionality show up a bit more strongly. And the intentionality of a 14-year-old, you could still sit back and ask them, what is it you would like to see happen? Okay. They may not be able to answer it clearly, but we give them the chance to think about it in a different way. Instead of asking, why are you doing that? Why aren't you doing what I said? And I tend to say, leave why questions for the philosophers. They're not ones that we can actually answer. But if we ask, if we go back to that concreteness and just say, what is it that you're looking for here? Not in a sarky way either, but gentle inquiry, and just give them the chance to fumble, give them that space to fail gracefully, and just find their words to describe their feelings. Because I work with a number of teens who say big words to match big feelings, and something they don't always mean them. They're just learning the meaning of things and how to connect them with the feeling in their body. So go back to that intentionality piece. They intend to go online and do stuff. Yeah. Whereas when parents are telling them no, that intentionality is directed away from parents as opposed to towards self. And when we give them the chance to think about what they want to do, they have that chance to choose that pathway instead.
Thank you. That was a great answer. And Rowan, thanks so much. I agree with you. Not a question, but Rowan's saying what a wonderfully useful and clear talk. Thank you very much, Dr. Mattoli. And a great question come in, and I think that would resonate with many parents actually. What strategies do you suggest for a shy, reserved 15-year-old girl who seems reluctant to initiate social connection with friends? Thank you for that question, and I think many parents will connect with that one.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I think that and there's two types. There's not just the explosive teen or the rambunctious teen. There's the super quiet people as well. And what we have to do is honor their personality type that's emerging there. They've got to feel that hope that if they connect with another human, something good will come out of it. And they've got to feel enough self-efficacy that if they take that big risk, okay, that it will come out in some kind of reward. So if their brain doesn't have the predictive ability for this, that they can't perceive that something positive will happen, then they're less inclined to do it. So when we couple that with a personality that's just a little bit more introverted, it looks super non-responsive, super reticent. And sometimes they just need to be allowed smaller groups to engage with. They need to be encouraged to think about the one or two friends they would like to spend time with. And parents can certainly make those spaces available taking a little bit of extra effort for these students is worth it, because they need to learn if they advocate for self, advocate for their own needs, the needs will be met. And there's transitioning from parents doing that for them to them figuring out, how do I do this myself? But if we leave them there to flounder and they keep being shy and we keep telling them, don't be shy, it doesn't give them an answer or a pathway. Yeah. And they have no sense of agency there. And that's the other tricky piece, because they're still developing that.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm taking some words away here with me as a parent, such as space, giving your child space, understanding that biological development, patience, and role modeling. You know, like you said before, if you answer your child, but if you answer sarcastically, if you're tired, you know, you don't always get it right, then they're going to pick those things up really, really quickly. And some really good questions coming in, and one that we've had running through actually prior to the talk about regaining teenagers' trust. Do you have any advice or tips about that? And
And
thank
that
you
one,
for that question. Yeah.
yes, such a good one and such a tricky one, because this is where we feel that we've lost them, right? As I said,
Yeah.
there's a natural stepping away, because they perforce have to go off and do something different, because they're reorienting themselves towards their own future. Now, this is predestined. It's all designed, and the neurons are firing off the way they need to. The hormones are firing off. They don't necessarily know where they're going, and they don't have control. But what they need is that sort of space to do it. So once they've got that, if you're anchored there and you're still giving them that safe space, and I showed you the picture of the little boy putting his hand on his father's hand, as long as they know you're there and you don't change hugely, believe it or not, when they're done with their synaptic pruning, they come back and they see that as a comfortable space. But we have to be careful, and I showed that tree with the rope pulling on it, that we're not trying to reconnect with their child self. We we can't. Yeah, they blindly trust us when they're little. It's just what the brain is designed to do. And once they start having choice and volition, and figuring out what actually really motivates them, they're becoming a different person. Yeah, not separate, not completely separate from us. They're still our children, but they need to do this. So I don't know how far the disconnect is in the person or the family where the question is coming from. But if there's been loud voices in the home or harsh words, sometimes it's enough to repair a rupture. We have to be able to say, as adults, modeling the behavior we would like to see, you know, I've lost my patience quite a few times there. I have to apologize. Okay. Accept the retribution. They're going to go, yeah. And they're not going to want to talk to you for a while. But as long as you model that, it gives the space for the humanity to come in. And that's a very different feeling that you're giving them. Then they feel that it's safe to come back. But as I said, you're a tiger like the rest of the world at this point. If we tell them, don't do that, do this instead, you're wrong, you should be doing this, why are you doing that? If we question them when they don't know what they're doing and it's not in their control, we're making them feel kind of bad about that process. Yeah. So it's easier to say, you are doing this. I'm here for you. We've had some clunky bits in the past. I'm here if you feel like reconnecting. Yeah. Because I appreciate where I did this, which I did not intend to do. And that takes a lot for adults to do. Okay. It takes 10,000 times more effort for a teen to do. But if we model repairing ruptures in relationships, we have a much better chance. Yeah. So getting them back on board, as I said, it depends on what happened. They went off the rails, but we can't always see teenagers as being off the rails in the first instance. So I would say it depends on how you're framing it too.
Yeah. Great advice. And as you said in your webinar, so difficult for a young person and us as adults at times to articulate what we're feeling and what we're thinking. A really tough one. Do we have time for a couple more questions, Scarlett? There's some terrific ones coming in here.
Absolutely.
So a question and one that I've had before, you know, my teen is almost the size of an adult. How do we enforce the boundaries? You know, like not getting out of bed for school and such, you know, they don't respect them. Where do we go with that?
Oh, this is a tough one and a perennial one. Yeah. As soon as they realize they're bigger than you, they get a whole new sense of being, right? It's not quite accurate yet, because if we feed our children right, most of them, the next generation does end up being a little bit taller than the parents. So it's okay, just acknowledge it. Say, you're bigger than me now. I'm not here to have a physical altercation. I'm here as your parent. I'm still, this is my household. And I think I've mentioned this before in previous talks with parents, that this is it. If the values are there and they're understood, and the teens just have to be gently guided back to, look, in our house, this is the way we do it. We'd really, really, really appreciate if you could be on board and have respect for this. But I respect your need to do something different right now. And it's still, it's that honesty and giving them the out that is different. As I said, not all families use kind words all the time, right? So it's about what would be the words that you would use in your household that match it. Hong Kong is full of very tiny households, and when we're cooped up in a room with what feels, or our brain is telling us, as a tiger, it's very hard to calm down, to get those chemicals to stop issuing forth, and let this guy come back on and find some nice words. So, as I said, the onus is largely on parents to do that modeling as much as they can, even when they don't feel like it, even when the teen has been rude. But even that one is about, hey, we use kind words with each other. Reiterating those values helps anchor them a bit.
Yeah, great. And I like the way you start off with that. I can't make you do this, and let's see what we can do. Great.
But one more piece, sorry. The other thing that happens is about 27, when that prefrontal cortex comes in, the penny drops for most humans, and they sort of have this thought that occurs to them, oh my gosh, my parents don't know everything. So we have it at different stages in life where we have this, I'm bigger than you, I'm smarter than you, I'm something than you, because you're the only adult they constantly see where they are aligned and there's genetic material there. Even in adoptive parents, if you are their parent, their mom or dad, or whatever they call you, that's it, you're connected. They see you as a primary person to model from. It's always there, even when they say it's not.
Thank you. A couple more, last couple. I think we could go on because they're great ones. And thanks, Divya. Great to know that you found the talk so useful. Some really good comments coming through, and we really appreciate your acknowledgements for Dr. Scarlett's time tonight. A really interesting one here, Dr. Scarlett. Troubling friendship groups. Step in or stay out between the ages of 13, 15? Terrific question.
It is. And I also am acutely aware of Hong Kong being one of those relatively safe places. We do let our children have freedom much earlier than perhaps other big cities. So they are exposed to different things. I think the definition there would need to be established. What is the worrying friendship group? Because you have to remember, their brain is primed to take risk. They know what their family is, and they're intentionally, even though it's out of their awareness, looking for difference. They're trying on other personalities, other parties, to see, if I hang with this crowd, how do I feel? I look at how they judge me, and then I go home and reflect, how do I feel about myself when these people like me? And there's the parent opinion on this sometimes just doesn't have any weight anymore. It's really tough. But they know if you say no at 13, it's a no. Now, unless that 13-year-old is a giant oak and just, that's it, they're out of there. Most 13-year-olds are still understanding that this is the household. We appreciate that you really enjoy this person. And again, sitting down and saying, you seem to really enjoy them. What is it that makes you feel so good with them? What is it that they give you? Even just gentle inquiry about what is it that the child is experiencing at that time that feels positive. As they were looking for, what is firing off that reward pathway? Because we don't repeat behavior unless it's really, really good and rewarding. That's the one thing, that directionality. We only stick to it when we get grit in mind. When we're in flow or highly motivated or hopeful, we will repeat behavior. So there's something in that worrying friendship group that gives them hope, makes them feel good, gives them something that their brain needs. So, and I always say, there's no behavior that doesn't have a need behind it. It's invisible to all of us until we ask.
Yeah, thank you. And I think we need to give a shout out to the parents that we've got listening here that have got 17 and 18-year-olds, and we've got quite a few, and I think there's some themes coming through here. And you know, what type of boundaries in the family home would you expect parents to have in place for an 18 or 18-and-a-half-year-old? How can we get our 17-year-old son to engage in their studies as they move towards their IB examinations? How can they see the value of it? So maybe we can finish on that, and we've got lots more, but we haven't got a lot of time left.
And I'm quite happy to try and give some answers to that on paper that you could send out afterwards. Right. So please send in any more questions that you have. I will go through all of them, no problem. But for the 17, 18-year-olds, it is tricky. They're bigger, they're hairier, they're smellier, they're dirtier. They have all kinds of wisdom, and they know better. And it is tricky for them to get into that motivation, anchoring that they have to finish the high school, not just to fulfill parents' reward, but there's got to be some intrinsic motivator. So with students, sometimes working with the guidance counselors, working with the teams, could be one of those options where we say, go to them, figure out where you're going to take this, because once you graduate, this is what you've got in your pocket, right? If you really don't like home, you really don't like our values, okay, and I'm saying just a very strong, simple one here as an example, then that is what being an adult is, and that is what you do with all the things you've learned, is you make a choice. But with that high school degree, we've really got to get you motivated somewhere to do it. Now that has to be intrinsic, or else it won't happen. They have to hope that they could possibly get a good grade, or it won't happen. And they certainly won't have grit where they think it's not worthwhile, or they have learning differences, they don't understand it, or they're embarrassed because they're so far behind. It's really tricky. Now, I work with a lot of students who have learning differences. Their auditory processing is out, so they can't necessarily get lectures just by sitting in a room. And they daydream, right? They just go off to another place. And they wake up at the end of the lecture, not having taken notes, not having taken direction. And everybody is like those pictures I showed, you know, sort of barreling down on them. Stress hormones come out. This guy switches off. Whatever hope we had of getting the information in there is gone. And they do need extra consideration. So I think the 17, 18-year-olds who are finishing up in that IB year, they need to be helped to understand this is a year where you really take care of yourself. This is so critical. We're not going to make normal demands on you. Maybe just give them that space. If it's taking all of the energy just to find the motivation, then we have to listen to that. As I said, there's a behavior there that has a need behind it. They can't anchor themselves in what's there. I also see some students who are afraid of the future. They're afraid of leaving home. They're afraid of the unknown. And I think that if they were allowed to voice that, you know, we can't necessarily make it feel better, but we understand it and we have a lot more patience with them. But I would avoid the why can't you do it? Why aren't you doing it? And ask more, okay, what is it that you would do if you passed these exams? Just try and anchor them in a thought, a positive thought that's about the growth piece. As I say, I agree. Growth mindset is a little bit hackneyed, but the concepts are still worthwhile. Yeah?
Yeah.
You just get them concretely and get the words out of their head. We have something to work with. So it's tricky. I also have an 18-year-old at home who's finishing IB, so I'm right there with you, families.
Yeah. And yeah, the power of reframing our questions, and also not expecting what we want to hear is a challenge for parents, but we're all on that learning journey. So Scarlett, we've gone over 10 minutes, and thank you to so many parents that have acknowledged what a great session. And Dr Scarlett, thank you from all West Island School community, and we will send the questions to you, and hopefully we can get some more answers and continue on what is a very rich and purposeful and important dialogue for all of us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share. Wishing everyone well. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night.